The moment Julian Ashworth called me his wife in front of 300 people, I forgot how to breathe. 1 second I was standing at the edge of the room, invisible, unremarkable, exactly where I belonged. The next second, every camera in the building was pointed at my face, and the most powerful man in the city was walking toward me with a smile that told the world I was his. I wasn't his wife. I had never spoken to this man. I didn't know his middle name, his birthday, or anything about him beyond what the headlines printed. I wasn't even supposed to be at that gala, but there I stood, frozen under crystal chandeliers that cast sharp light on every diamond in the room and every mistake that was about to unfold. The air smelled of polished wood and expensive cologne. Champagne glasses clinked somewhere behind me, and Julian Ashworth's voice echoed through the silence he had just created. Yes, she is my wife. 5 words. That's all it took to unravel everything I thought I knew about my life. The flashbulbs exploded. Reporters shouted questions I couldn't hear over the ringing in my ears. Somewhere, someone was congratulating me, calling me by a name that didn't belong to me, welcoming me into a world I had never asked to enter. And I just stood there, paralyzed, terrified, completely and utterly trapped. Now, before I take you deeper into this story, I need you to do something for me. If you're new to this channel, welcome to Mr. Andy Love Stories. I need you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this one is going to stay with you long after it ends. Trust me on that. And if you're already part of this family, thank you. Your support means everything. Now let me take you back to where it all began, because to understand how I ended up frozen under those chandeliers, you need to know who I was before Julian Ashworth looked at me and decided to change my entire existence. My name is Mira Delacroix, and 24 hours before that gala, I was nobody, not nobody in the self-pitying sense, nobody in the practical sense. I was 28 years old, a junior associate at a mid-tier marketing firm, living in an apartment so small that my kitchen and living room were the same room. I worked twice as hard as anyone else for half the recognition. I kept my head down. I followed the rules. I never asked for more than I had earned. My mother raised me that way. Single mother, double shifts. The kind of woman who taught me that dignity was the only currency that couldn't be taken from you. She used to say, "Mira, you don't need to be seen by everyone. You just need to be seen by the right people at the right time." I thought I understood what she meant. I thought being invisible was a survival strategy. I thought if I just worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, waited long enough, eventually my moment would come. I didn't realize my moment would arrive like a hurricane. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening. My colleague Priya, voice thin and desperate, on the other end of the line. "Mira, I need the biggest favor of your life." She was supposed to attend the Hartwell Foundation's annual winter benefit, a major networking event, the kind of gala where careers were made over champagne and carefully placed compliments. Priya had been preparing for weeks. New dress, rehearsed talking points, a plan to introduce herself to 3 specific executives who could change her trajectory. And then she got food poisoning. "I can't go," she said, groaning between words. "I can barely stand, but someone from the firm needs to be there. We promised representation. If we don't show up, we lose the account." I listened to her explanation, already knowing where this was heading. "Mira, please, you're the only one available. Just go, smile, shake a few hands and leave. You don't even have to talk to anyone important. Just be present." I stared at my reflection in the window of my apartment. Tired eyes, hair that needed washing. A woman who had never attended anything more formal than a company Christmas party. "I don't have anything to wear," I said weakly. "I'll send you my dress, and shoes, and the invitation. It's all taken care of. You just need to show up." That's how it started. With a borrowed dress that didn't quite fit, shoes that were half a size too small, an invitation with someone else's name printed in elegant script. Just show up. Just blend in. Just represent the firm and disappear. If only it had been that simple. The night of the gala, I stood outside the venue for 7 full minutes before I could make myself walk through the doors. The building rose before me like a fortress. Gleaming columns, velvet ropes, security guards in crisp suits scanning invitations with expressions that suggested they could smell imposters from 50 feet away. I adjusted the borrowed dress for the 100th time. It was beautiful, Objectively speaking, deep emerald silk that caught the light when I moved. But it was made for Priya's body, not mine. Slightly too tight across the shoulders, slightly too loose at the waist, the kind of almost right that made me feel even more wrong. "You can do this," I whispered to myself. "You're invisible. You're wallpaper. You're here to smile and leave." I handed my invitation to the security guard. He glanced at the name, glanced at me, and waved me through without a second look. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Polished wood and fresh flowers and something underneath it all. Something expensive that I couldn't name. The scent of money, I suppose. The scent of people who had never worried about paying rent. The ballroom stretched before me like something from a dream. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they seemed to disappear into shadow. Champagne towers rose on tables draped in white silk. Women in gowns that cost more than my annual salary laughed in clusters, while men in tailored suits discussed things I couldn't begin to understand. I stepped forward, and my heels clicked too loud on the marble floor. A woman glanced in my direction. Her eyes swept from my face to my dress to my borrowed shoes, and I watched her dismiss me in real time, not with cruelty, with something worse, with absolute disinterest. I wasn't worth remembering. Good, I told myself. That's exactly what you want. I moved toward the edge of the room, seeking the shadows where people like me belonged. I snagged a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, mostly to have something to do with my hands. I practiced looking comfortable while feeling anything but. That's when the energy in the room shifted. It happened before I even understood what was causing it. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the entrance. Phones emerged from clutches and pockets, held aloft like offerings. "He's here," someone whispered. I didn't need to ask who. Julian Ashworth entered the room like he owned it, which, technically, he probably did. The Ashworth family had built half of this city's skyline. Julian himself had transformed a struggling telecommunications company into a global empire before his 35th birthday. His face appeared on magazine covers. His name moved stock prices. His decisions affected the livelihoods of thousands of people who would never meet him. And now he was walking across the ballroom floor, and everyone was watching. I watched too, not because I wanted to, but because it was impossible to look away. He was tall, dark hair swept back from a face that seemed designed to intimidate, sharp jawline, sharper eyes. He wore his suit like armor, perfectly tailored, not a single thread out of place. But it was the way he moved that held attention. Calm, unhurried, the pace of someone who had never needed to rush because the world adjusted its schedule to accommodate him. He moved like someone who had never been told no, I thought, and wouldn't recognize the word if he heard it. People approached him immediately, hands extended, smiles brightened. Everyone wanted a moment, a word, a chance to exist in his orbit for even a few seconds. I turned away, reminding myself this had nothing to do with me. I was here to represent the firm, to smile, to blend in. I moved toward the bar, deciding one more glass of champagne might help settle my nerves. I never made it. The first warning came as a voice, sharp and hungry, cutting through the ambient noise behind me. Mr. Ashworth, is it true you've been secretly married?" I paused, mildly curious despite myself. The tabloids had been speculating about Julian Ashworth's personal life for years. He was famously private, ruthlessly protective of whatever existed beyond his professional persona. "Our sources suggest your wife is here tonight," the reporter pressed. "Can we get a comment?" And then, impossibly, the crowd parted, and Julian Ashworth was looking directly at me. Time fractured. Every detail sharpened with horrible clarity. The weight of his gaze. The sudden silence spreading outward like ripples in water. The cameras already swinging in my direction, following the line of his attention. I felt myself freeze. Not dramatically, not visibly, but somewhere inside, every system responsible for movement and speech and rational thought simply stopped. He was studying me, assessing me, making a calculation I couldn't begin to understand. Then he smiled. It was a small smile, controlled, the kind that revealed nothing while promising everything. "Yes," Julian Ashworth said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "My wife is here. She's standing right there." The world stopped breathing. For one impossible moment, everything hung suspended. The chandeliers seemed to freeze mid-sparkle. The champagne stopped bubbling in glasses. Every heartbeat in that room synchronized into a single, devastating pause. And then the chaos erupted. Flashbulbs exploded like a lightning storm. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions that blurred into incomprehensible noise. Guests gasped, whispered, reached for phones to capture the moment that was already reshaping itself into tomorrow's headlines. And I stood at the center of it all, completely paralyzed. My mind screamed at my body to move, to speak, to correct this insane mistake before it became something I couldn't take back. I opened my mouth, and the word no formed on my tongue. I felt it there, ready to emerge, ready to save me from whatever this was becoming. But Julian Ashworth was already moving toward me. His stride was unhurried, confident, as if he had planned this moment down to the second, and the cameras were already flashing, and the congratulations were already starting, and the world was already deciding who I was before I could tell them who I wasn't. He reached my side. His hand found the small of my back, light but unmistakable. A touch that said ownership to everyone watching, a touch that said, "Do not run to me." He leaned close, so close I could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive and overwhelming, so close that his breath brushed my ear when he whispered, "Breathe, smile, trust me." Trust him? I didn't know him. I didn't know why he had chosen me, what game he was playing, what impossible debt I had just unwittingly inherited. I didn't know anything except that my entire life had just pivoted on a single sentence spoken by a stranger. But I did the only thing my paralyzed body could manage. I smiled. The cameras captured it. The guests believed it. And somewhere in that ballroom, the woman who had walked in as a nobody walked out as Julian Ashworth's wife. At least, that's what the world thought. The truth was far more complicated. The noise faded behind us as he guided me through a side corridor. His hand remained at my back, steering me around corners and through doorways that seemed designed to separate the spectacle from whatever came after. Security guards flanked us, their faces deliberately blank. Gold-painted walls stretched on either side. My heels clicked against floors that felt too polished, too expensive, too far removed from anywhere I had ever belonged. And then a door closed behind us, and the silence hit me like a wall. I exhaled sharply, releasing the breath I had been holding since he first spoke my new identity into existence. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I turned on him. That was a mistake. My voice came out steadier than I expected, but barely. You should have corrected them. Julian loosened his tie with practiced calm, as if we had just stepped out of a routine meeting rather than a public spectacle that had just detonated my entire existence. "No," he replied. "That would have been the mistake." Disbelief flashed across my face. I felt it there, hot and sharp, replacing the fear with something that felt almost like anger. "You called me your wife, in front of everyone. You don't even know my last name." "I know enough," he said evenly. I laughed once, short and humorless. "Enough to ruin my life." He met my gaze. There was no warmth there, no apology. Just calculation, assessment. The same look I imagined he gave spreadsheets and contracts and anything else that required analysis rather than emotion. Enough to save mine, he said. That stopped me. He gestured toward the door, toward the world we had just left behind. If I had denied it, the headlines would have written themselves. Speculation, confusion, weakness. My board has been pressuring me for months. They want stability, certainty, a family man they can market to shareholders. "So you used me as a shield," I said. "Yes," no hesitation, no shame. "And you I let you." My voice rose. I froze. "That's not the same as consenting." His eyes remained steady. "That's not the same as refusing either." The words hit me like a punch, because he was right. I had frozen. I had stood there while he rewrote my identity, and I had said nothing. I had smiled for the cameras instead of screaming the truth. "What does that make me?" He seemed to read the question on my face. "If you walk out now and tell them the truth," he continued, "they won't see honesty. They'll see chaos. They'll ask who you are, why you were there, what you were trying to gain. People with power will decide your motives for you, and they won't be kind." I pictured it, the cameras turning on me alone. The questions, the scrutiny, the endless speculation. My face plastered across tabloids with captions that painted me as a liar, an infiltrator, a woman who had somehow schemed her way into Julian Ashworth's orbit for attention or money or something equally damning. I was just filling in for someone, I said quietly. I wasn't supposed to be part of this. I know, he said. That's why I chose you. I looked up sharply. Chose me for what? For control. His voice was measured. And for credibility. The words landed like weights, each one pressing down on the fragile sense of self I was trying to hold together. He continued, his tone steady, deliberate. Tonight, you can't deny being my wife. Not yet. Doing so would only make things worse for both of us. My heartbeat quickened. Then what are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to stay, he said, for the rest of the evening and tomorrow. Tomorrow, he said. We talk. I shook my head. I don't belong in your world. That may be true, he replied, but right now, you're standing in it, and the longer you stand alone, the more dangerous it becomes. I understood then what he was really offering. Not romance, not kindness, protection, a shield wrapped in a transaction. What happens if I say no? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. Then you walk back into that room alone, and the story writes itself without you. Silence stretched between us, heavy with implications I didn't want to examine. I thought of my job, my reputation, the fragile stability I had spent years constructing brick by careful brick, all of it now trembling on a foundation I hadn't built and couldn't control. I'll stay, I said finally, but only tonight. A faint expression crossed his features, not triumph, relief. That's all I'm asking for, he said, and then he opened the door, and the noise rushed back in, and I stepped forward into a life that wasn't mine. The car ride away from the gala was quiet, heavy with unspoken questions. City lights slid past the tinted windows. Buildings rose and fell outside the glass like landmarks of a world I was only beginning to understand. Julian sat across from me, scrolling through messages on his phone, already managing the fallout of those 5 words spoken in public. I watched the city blur past and tried to remember who I had been 6 hours ago. The woman in the borrowed dress, the nobody who just wanted to blend in and disappear. That woman felt very far away now. You're very good at this, I said suddenly. Julian looked up. At what? Acting like this was planned. It wasn't planned, he replied, but it wasn't accidental either. The car slowed as iron gates rose ahead of us. A private residence, guarded, immaculate, the kind of place I had only ever seen from the outside, usually while passing by quickly, pretending not to stare. When we stepped inside, the silence was different from the corridor at the gala. This silence was intentional, controlled, the kind that came from too much space and too few people living in it. The foyer alone was larger than my entire apartment. Marble floors stretched toward a staircase that curved upward, like something from a museum. Artwork hung on walls that seemed designed to make you feel small. Julian removed his jacket and placed it neatly over a chair. I remained standing, unsure where to put myself in a space that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Sit, he said, not as an order, as an invitation. I meant what I said, he began. Tonight cannot be undone. But it can be managed. Managed how? I asked. By turning the misunderstanding into a structure. I stared at him. A lie, I said. A temporary arrangement, he corrected. My laugh was soft, incredulous. You announced me as your wife. There's nothing temporary about that. There can be, he said. If both of us agree. I waited. I need stability, he continued. Not emotionally, publicly. My personal life has become a distraction. The board has been pressing for months. They want certainty. A family man, someone predictable. And you decided I look predictable? I asked. No, he said honestly. I decided you look real. The words caught me off guard. You didn't chase attention tonight, he continued. You didn't posture. You didn't try to benefit from the confusion. You froze. People trust that. I looked away, uncomfortable with being analyzed so openly. I'm not asking you to pretend forever, he said. I'm asking you to consider a contract. He slid a folder across the table between us. Thin, clean, already prepared. I didn't touch it. A public marriage, he continued. Limited duration, clear boundaries. You would be protected financially and legally. You would not be expected to love me. You would not be expected to give up your life. I studied his face, searching for mockery. There was none. And if I refuse? I asked. Then, tomorrow morning, I correct the statement. He said, the media will ask why I lied. They'll ask who you are, why you were there. You'll be mentioned, speculated about, forgotten perhaps, or remembered for all the wrong reasons. I swallowed hard. You make it sound like a favor. I'm offering a solution, he replied. For both of us. My fingers finally brushed the folder. I opened it slowly, reading words that turned my name into a role. Spouse, partner, representation. This is insane, I murmured. Yes, he agreed. But it's also controlled. I looked up at him again. You're asking me to step into your world and trust that I won't disappear inside it. I'm asking you to step into it with rules, he said. Rules that protect you. Silence settled between us once more. I closed the folder. I won't decide tonight, I said firmly. He nodded. I would be disappointed if you did. He stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Take the night. Tomorrow, we speak again. A staff member appeared as if summoned by thought, guiding me toward a guest room that could have housed a family of 4. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in a mirror that seemed designed to show every flaw. Hours ago, I was invisible. Now I was someone's wife in the eyes of the world. And tomorrow, I had to decide whether to make that lie permanent. Morning light filtered through tall windows, softer than the glare of last night's chandeliers, but no less exposing. I woke slowly, disoriented by silk sheets and a ceiling that felt far too high. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then memory rushed back with brutal clarity. The gala, the cameras, his voice saying she is my wife. I sat up, grounding myself. Today was not about shock. Today was about choice. When I entered the study, Julian was already there. Not in a suit this time, but in a crisp shirt with sleeves rolled back, as if he wanted the conversation to feel less formal. A legal folder rested on the table between 2 cups of coffee. He didn't touch either. You slept, he said. A little, I replied. Enough to think clearly. That's all I hoped for. I took the seat across from him. There was no audience now, no pressure of flashing lights, just 2 people facing the consequences of 5 words spoken too soon. I read the contract. I said. He nodded. Then you understand what I'm asking. I understand what you're offering, I corrected, and what you expect in return. He remained silent, allowing me space. You want a public wife, I continued. Appearances, events, statements, but not my feelings. That's correct. And you want boundaries, clear lines, so neither of us forgets why this exists. Yes, I exhaled slowly. Then I want my own conditions. His gaze sharpened, not with irritation, with respect. Name them. I opened the folder again. But this time I didn't read. I spoke first. This isn't ownership. I don't belong to you. I represent a role. He nodded once. Agreed. Second, there will be no shared bedroom, no physical expectations, public appearances only. Agreed. Third, I keep my name, my work, my independence. Agreed. I paused, then added quietly. And fourth, when this ends, it ends cleanly. No public blame, no damage to my reputation. He met my eyes without hesitation. I will ensure that. Something in my shoulders loosened. Not trust, but clarity. He slid a pen toward me. This protects you. I studied the pen as if it weighed more than it should. Signing meant stepping forward. Refusing meant stepping back into uncertainty. How long? I asked. 6 months, he replied. Enough for the narrative to settle. Enough for the board to be satisfied. And after that? After that, he said, we tell the truth in a way that no one can use against you. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. This is the strangest decision I've ever made, I said. He offered a faint smile. It's not even in my top 10. I opened my eyes, picked up the pen, and signed. The sound of ink on paper felt louder than it should. He signed next. There was no applause, no celebration, just the quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted, and that my life would never be the same. Now, at this point, I need to pause. If you're watching this and thinking I would never agree to something like that, I want you to really consider what you would do. When someone powerful offers you protection and the alternative is destruction, sometimes survival doesn't look like courage. Sometimes it looks like compromise. Drop a comment below and tell me what would you have done in my shoes. And if you're invested in this story, hit that like button. It really helps more than you know. Now let me tell you what happened when I realized what I'd really agreed to. The transformation began immediately. Later that day, I stood in a dressing room while a stylist adjusted fabric and posture, teaching me how to move through spaces designed to intimidate. Colors were analyzed against my skin tone. Silhouettes were tested against the image Julian's team wanted to project. I listened. I learned. Not because I wanted to belong, but because I refused to be small. They weren't teaching me to be someone else, I realized. They were teaching me how to survive being seen. That evening, we stepped into public together for the first time since the gala. Another event. Another sea of glittering strangers. But this time, I didn't freeze. I lifted my chin. I took his arm, not as a lover, as an equal participant in a carefully constructed performance. "This is my wife," he said to approaching guests. The same words from the gala, but now I understood my role in them. To the world, we were married. To each other, we were bound by ink, rules, and an agreement neither of us fully understood yet. And somewhere beneath the performance, something I couldn't name began to stir, unnoticed, waiting for its turn. The first weeks passed in a careful rhythm. Like a dance, both of us pretended not to practice. Mornings began with polite distance. Coffee, in separate rooms. Schedules coordinated through assistance rather than conversation. Evenings ended with separate doors closing down a long hallway. To anyone watching from the outside, the marriage looked effortless. To us, it was measured, intentional, quiet. We appeared together at charity luncheons, business dinners, formal receptions where names were remembered and faces were judged. I learned when to smile and when to remain still. I learned how to listen without shrinking, how to hold silence like a weapon rather than a defeat. Julian watched closely, but not with the controlling gaze I had expected. He offered guidance without condescension. He corrected others when they spoke over me. He introduced me not as an accessory, but as a presence. "This is my wife," he said often now. Calm, certain. Each time, the words felt less like a lie and more like a weight I was learning to carry. At home, the rules held, separate wings. The careful choreography of two people sharing space without sharing lives. But spaces have a way of shrinking over time. I noticed small things first. The way he remembered how I took my coffee. Black, 1 sugar, never cream. He didn't ask. He simply remembered. I noticed how he read late into the night, surrounded by reports and projections that seemed to carry the weight of entire economies on their pages. I noticed the tension in his shoulders when he thought no one was watching. The isolation that came from being too powerful for anyone to question and too guarded for anyone to reach. He noticed things about me too. The way I listened to people others dismissed. The way I never interrupted, but always remembered what was said. The way I stood my ground in rooms full of predators, refusing to become small even when everything in me wanted to shrink. One evening after a particularly tense board event, I broke the silence first. "They wanted to test me," I said. He nodded. "They always do." I didn't fail. "No," he said. "You didn't." The approval in his voice was quiet, but it settled somewhere warm in my chest. It mattered more than applause. Another night, I overheard a phone call that was meant to be private. His study door was slightly open, and I had paused outside, caught by the sound of his voice stripped of its usual certainty. He was speaking about pressure, about expectations, about how little room there was to be human when people invested in an image instead of a person. I didn't interrupt. I didn't retreat. I simply listened, carrying what I heard without judging it. The next morning, he thanked me without explaining why. I didn't ask. Something had shifted between us, not dramatically, subtly, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface of what we showed the world. The rules were still clear, but somehow, our edges kept softening. The public began to change its tone as well. Headlines shifted from speculation to admiration. Comments softened. The board relaxed. Invitations multiplied, and slowly, without either of us acknowledging it, the arrangement began to feel less like a performance and more like a partnership. I caught myself looking for him in crowded rooms. I caught him watching me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, and I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself the contract was clear. I told myself that whatever was building between us was proximity, not connection. But late at night, alone in my wing of his enormous house, I wondered if I was lying to myself. At one formal gala, a guest leaned toward her companion, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. "She's clearly temporary," the woman sneered. "These things never last." I kept my expression neutral, but something cold settled in my stomach. Before I could respond, Julian did. "She's not temporary," he said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise with quiet authority. "She's chosen." The room fell silent. Later, alone in the car, I turned to him. "You didn't have to say that." "I know," he replied. Something shifted between us then. Not romance, not yet, but recognition, an acknowledgement that whatever this had started as, it was becoming something more complicated. At home that night, I lingered at his study door. "You crossed a line," I said gently. "So did you," he answered. "By staying." I considered that for a long moment. Then I nodded, and we returned to our separate rooms. But the distance felt different now, less like protection, more like restraint. The test came without warning. It arrived on a night designed to celebrate success. Black ties and soft music, smiles sharpened to weapons. Every word weighed and measured by people who had made careers out of finding weakness. Another gala, another room full of people who believed they understood power simply because they were allowed to stand near it. I sensed it the moment we stepped inside. The greetings felt different. The questions lingered longer. Eyes followed my movements not with curiosity this time, but with evaluation. This wasn't about whether I belonged at his side anymore. It was about whether I could survive there. We separated briefly, as we often did at events like this. Julian was pulled into a conversation with major investors. I was left among board members, spouses, and executives who smiled too tightly. "So," a man said, swirling his drink, "what exactly do you do?" I recognized the tone immediately. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. "I work," I replied evenly. There was a pause. A few glances exchanged. "Yes, but before," another woman added, leaning in with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Before all of this, before him, before the ring, before the name." I felt the familiar urge to deflect, to make myself smaller, to apologize for existing in a space I hadn't been born into. But I didn't. "I built my life without shortcuts," I said calmly, "and I continue to do so now." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Good. Moments later, the real test arrived. A senior board member approached me directly. No smile this time. No pretense of casual conversation. "We've been meaning to speak with you," he said. "Your presence has certainly changed the narrative around the company." I inclined my head slightly. "That wasn't my intention. Nevertheless," he continued, "some are concerned you're a distraction." I didn't look toward Julian. I didn't search for rescue. "A distraction from what?" I asked. "From discipline," the man replied. "From control." I met his gaze without flinching. If discipline requires silence, then it was never stable to begin with. A murmur rippled through the nearby guests. I continued. "Steady now. The company hasn't lost focus since I arrived. If anything, it's gained clarity. People respond to leadership that feels human. Predictable doesn't mean powerful. It means fragile." The board members studied me for a long moment, reassessing, recalculating. I had passed a test I hadn't known I was taking. Later, as applause rose for a speech I barely heard, I felt Julian's presence beside me again. He didn't speak immediately. He simply stood there, closer than usual. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "They wanted to see if I would fold," I replied. "And you didn't." I turned to him. "Was that the test?" "One of them," he admitted. We stepped away from the crowd onto a balcony overlooking the city. The noise faded into distance. Wind brushed past us, cool and grounding. "You didn't intervene," I said. "You didn't need me to," he answered. Something settled between us then. Not tension. Trust. I was afraid. I admitted. So was I, he said. I looked at him in surprise. He met my eyes. I built this company on certainty, he continued. Tonight, you reminded them that strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it stands quietly and refuses to move. I studied his face, seeing him not as a role, not as a CEO, but as a man who had spent too long carrying everything alone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I stepped back, re-establishing distance. The rules still mattered. The contract still existed, but the way he looked at me now had changed. Not ownership, not control, recognition. When we returned to the ballroom, our hands brushed briefly as we walked side by side. Neither of us pulled away, and I realized something terrifying. I didn't want to. The fracture came quietly, the way real damage often does. It began with a headline I was never meant to read. I saw it on a screen I shouldn't have been near, scrolling past financial news while waiting for a driver. The words blurred at first, then sharpened into something unmistakable. Sources suggest marriage may be contractual. My chest tightened. I kept reading, heart pounding as familiar phrases appeared. Public strategy, image control, mutually beneficial arrangement. None of it was confirmed. None of it was denied. And then I saw the line that broke me. According to insiders, the CEO never intended the relationship to be real. I closed the screen and stepped back as if burned. Later that evening, I overheard the conversation that confirmed my worst fear. The door to Julian's study wasn't fully closed. I hadn't meant to listen. I had only paused, caught by the sound of my name spoken without warning. She was effective, Julian said calmly. Yes, the arrangement served its purpose. Another voice replied, sharp with implication. And now? There's risk, Julian answered. If the narrative shifts, I'll end it. End it. The words echoed in my head. I stepped away before I could hear more. That night, I didn't knock on his door. I didn't ask for explanations. I didn't demand the truth that had been hiding beneath every soft moment I had let myself believe was real. I packed quietly, folding borrowed clothes with deliberate care, leaving the ring on the dresser where it had always rested like a prop, writing a single note with steady hands. I agreed to represent a role. I didn't agree to be erased by it. In the morning, I left before the house woke. When Julian realized I was gone, it was already too late. He found the ring on the dresser, the empty room, the single note that said nothing and everything at once. He read it twice. The media sensed the shift immediately. Cameras appeared. Questions multiplied. Headlines erupted with speculation. Where's your wife? Are the rumors true? Is the marriage over? This time, Julian didn't answer fast enough. I returned to my old life. Smaller spaces, familiar routines, the quiet dignity of anonymity that I had once taken for granted. Friends asked what happened. I smiled and said it was temporary, that I had always known it would end. Inside, something hardened. I refused interviews, declined offers that felt like pity. I didn't expose him. I simply disappeared from his world as completely as I had appeared in it. Days passed, then weeks. Julian tried to reach me. Messages remained unanswered. Calls went to silence. For the first time, control slipped through his fingers. The board pressed harder. They wanted distance, damage control. They wanted him to let me go publicly, cleanly, make me the mistake, and move on. And for the first time, Julian Ashworth did not comply. At night, alone in a house that no longer felt ordered, he replayed every moment, every time I had stood my ground, every time I had chosen dignity over ease, every time I had protected him without being asked. He realized the truth too late. I was never the distraction. I was the only real thing in a world made of performance, and he had let me go. Across the city, I stood on a bridge overlooking dark water. City lights reflected on the surface like scattered stars. The air was cold. My breath formed clouds that disappeared as quickly as they formed. I had chosen myself. I had walked away. So why did it feel like I had lost everything? The decision didn't come in a boardroom. It came in silence. Julian stood alone in his office long after the city outside had gone dark. The contract was spread open on his desk. The signatures stared back at him, precise and cold. Ink that had once felt like control now felt like a cage. He reached for his phone again. No response. Called again. Silence. For the first time in years, he did nothing. No calls to lawyers. No strategy meetings. No crisis management. Just a man sitting in an empty room, realizing that everything he had tried to control had slipped through his fingers because he had forgotten how to hold anything gently. The next morning, he made a choice that shocked everyone who worked for him. He canceled meetings, declined interviews, refused a carefully prepared press statement designed to distance himself from the rumors at my expense. When the board demanded reassurance, he gave them none. Instead, he walked into the legal department and placed the contract on the table. "This is over," he said. "Effective immediately." The attorney hesitated. "Sir, the fallout, I'll handle it," Julian replied. Publicly, news spread fast when power stops hiding. By evening, speculation exploded. Reporters gathered. Cameras waited outside his building, his home, every exit. Everyone expected damage control. What they got was truth. Julian stepped onto a stage alone. No prepared notes, no rehearsed certainty, no armor of corporate precision. The room quieted. "My marriage was questioned," he began, his voice steady but stripped of its usual authority. "Not because it failed, but because I failed it." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "She was never a strategy," he continued. "She was never temporary, and she was never something I controlled." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. "I asked her to stand beside me when I needed stability," he said, "and she gave me integrity instead." He looked directly into the cameras then, as if he could see through them, as if he could see me. "If there was a contract, it was mine alone, and today I take full responsibility for it." Across the city, I heard about it by accident. A television was playing in the background of a small cafe while I waited for my coffee. I wasn't watching. Not until I heard his voice. I froze. On the screen, Julian stood alone before a sea of reporters. No entourage, no team managing his image. Just a man who looked like he had finally put something heavy down. "She deserved honesty," he said, "and I failed to give it in time." The cafe fell silent. Strangers glanced at me without knowing why my hands were trembling. I watched until the screen cut to analysis and speculation. Then I picked up my coffee with shaking hands and walked out into the cold air. The statement changed things. Not everything, but something. Stock prices fluctuated. Board members expressed fury behind closed doors. His carefully constructed image cracked in ways that would take months to repair. Julian stood in the wreckage of his perfect reputation. For the first time in his life, he had chosen honesty over control, and he had no idea if it would be enough. Later that night, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. The apartment was small, quiet, familiar in the way that only spaces we retreat to can feel. I had been staring at the wall, trying to decide if the numbness was better than the pain. The knock came again. I opened the door. Julian stood in the hallway of my small apartment building. No security, no driver waiting downstairs, no suit, no tie, no armor. He looked different, smaller somehow, human. I didn't say anything. I couldn't find the words. "I'm not here to explain," he said quietly. "I'm here to choose." "Choose what?" "You." The word hung in the air between us. Simple, certain, the first true thing he had ever said to me. "I ended the contract," he continued, "publicly, completely. There's nothing left for you to protect me from." I searched his face for calculation, for strategy, for the CEO who always had an angle. I found none. "The conversation you overheard," he said. "I was speaking to someone who wanted to use you as an exit strategy. I said what I needed to say to end that conversation, but I should have been honest with you instead." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over my chest. "How do I know this isn't another performance?" "You don't," he admitted, "but I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove it isn't." The vulnerability in his voice was unfamiliar, raw, real. "I spent my whole life controlling outcomes," he continued, "managing perception. And then you walked into that ballroom, someone who couldn't be managed, and you terrified me. What scared you about me?" I asked. He met my eyes. "That I wanted you to stay for reasons that had nothing to do with the contract." Silence stretched between us. fragile, infinite, electric with possibility. Everything I had told myself since I left crumbled against everything I felt standing in front of him now. Finally, I stepped back, not to close the door, to let him in. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't make promises or declarations. We sat in my small apartment, surrounded by the ordinary life he had never seen, and we talked for hours about everything, about nothing, about who we were before the gala and who we had become, about the lies we told others and the ones we told ourselves, about what it meant to be seen by someone who finally understood what they were looking at. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I realized something. I wasn't frozen anymore. Okay, I need to stop here for a moment. If this story is hitting you in the heart, I need you to do something. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to walk away from something or someone even when part of you wanted to stay? I read every comment, and your stories matter. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time, because what happens next changes everything. 6 months later, morning light filtered through curtains we had chosen together, falling across tangled sheets and intertwined hands. Julian stirred first, his eyes finding me before I fully woke. I felt his gaze on my face, warm and certain. "You're staring," I murmured without opening my eyes. "I'm memorizing," he replied. I smiled. It was a real smile now, the kind I didn't have to practice or perform. "We need to get ready," I said. "The foundation event starts at noon." "I know," but he didn't move. Instead, he reached toward the bedside table. "I've been thinking." "Dangerous habit," I teased. He ignored that. "The contract ended months ago." "I remember." "And you stayed." Also aware, he produced a small box from the drawer, different from anything that had come before. No legal documents attached, no carefully negotiated terms, just a ring that sparkled with quiet sincerity. "I was wondering," he said, "if you might consider staying permanently, not as an arrangement, not as a role." He opened the box. "As my wife, for real this time." I looked at the ring. I looked at the man holding it. I looked at the impossible journey that had led us from a ballroom lie to this moment of achingly honest truth. The first time he called me his wife, I froze. This time, when I answered, my voice was steady. "Yes." And that is the story of how a single lie changed everything, and how love found its way through the wreckage of perfect plans. Sometimes the biggest lies lead us to the deepest truths. Sometimes being chosen by accident is just the universe's way of putting you exactly where you're supposed to be. And sometimes the person who mistakes you for someone else ends up seeing you more clearly than anyone ever has. If this story moved you, hit that like button. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and turn on notifications. And leave me a comment below telling me, do you believe love can grow from unexpected beginnings? I can't wait to read your answers. Until next time, this is Mr. Andy Love Stories, reminding you that every great love story starts with an ordinary moment that becomes extraordinary. See you in the next one.